Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Best Practices and Systems of Support for Justice-Involved Veterans, sponsored by SAMHSA's service members, veterans, and their families, Technical Assistance Center. My name is Alexandra Mead, and I will serve as your moderator for this afternoon. I am a project manager for practice improvement with the National Council for Behavioral Health. Before we begin, we'd like to draw your attention to some important webinar logistics. There are two audio options for today's webinar, phone or computer audio. If you are using your telephone, please make sure to enter your audio PIN into your phone. You may send us questions at any time during the webinar by submitting them through the Q&A option located in the navigation bar. Depending on the question, we may type an answer back to you or save it for the end. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar today. This webinar is being recorded, and an audio version of the entire webinar, as well as a PDF of the presentation slides, will be available on the webinar archives page of the National Council website within 48 hours of this broadcast. Following the webinar, we invite you to please complete a short survey. And now, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you, Cicely.
I sure am, Alexandra. How's the sound check going from your end? Sounding okay?
Great, loud and clear.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for supporting us and our partners there at the National Council. And as you mentioned, I am here to represent our leadership from SAMHSA, where I get to have the honor of serving as our Military and Veteran Affairs Liaison. And I wanted to just thank all of you today as our numbers grow in the participant realm to join us for a really important and critically vital topic when we're looking at how we can support our military and veterans and their families. Today, I'm joined by an amazing panel of three gentlemen who will bring you both information, resources, and insights that I think are really critical to this conversation. And again, on behalf of everybody here at SAMHSA and our SMVF TA Center, which you'll hear about in just a moment, thanks for deciding to spend this next hour or so with us today. Next slide. So of course, disclaimer there that the views and opinions and content you hear today does not necessarily represent those views, opinions, or content that is representative of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, and DHHS. Next slide. So you're joining us today because of the amazing work that's been underway for many, many years now here at SAMHSA. About 2008 is when we started to partner with a number of our states and territories to really focus in on how we could strengthen the behavioral health systems that are meeting the needs of our service members, veterans, and their families. Our Technical Assistance Center has been around for many years now and helps us to lead and coordinate efforts like this one here today, and a number of other technical assistance and free virtual opportunities that we hope that you, your programs, your communities will take advantage of. Next slide. So our real mission in this work is to ensure that we have an ongoing collaboration among stakeholders like yourselves, providing a centralized mechanism for cities, states, and territories to both learn from one another, to connect and share on best practice models, to really ensure that we're supporting the coordinated responses with our federal partners, our state partners, and our local communities. And then encouraging that all of this is done with evidence-based and quality care in mind. Next slide. You can implement or you can interact with us in a number of ways. Of course, most of those are very, very virtual in nature as of the latest few months of our lives. We are very much interested in having folks give us feedback today, as was mentioned in your evaluation, about whether or not this topic or others are of interest to you. We want to create resources that are actually meeting the needs of our community partners and stakeholders. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll have contact information there. And if you're not already on our listserv, please let us know so we can ensure that we get those resources to your communities as well. But let's focus in on today. You're joining us specifically for a best practice and systems of support for justice-involved veterans webinar. And this webinar, we have a number of objectives which really are going to hone in on finding out about great federal and state programming, learning about some of the unique ways that individuals can have support, and figuring out ways that your communities and your resources may be leveraged to connect with these other partners and to learn a little bit about that cultural competency that may be needed when we're working to support our justice-involved veterans in particular. We're honored to have folks from VA and from our National Institute of Corrections to share a little bit about their amazing work in this space, and to have the amazing Ray Lay talk about his own personal experience and what he's doing now to harness his own experience and knowledge to support his fellow veterans. Next slide. So as you came to this webinar, I'm sure you were able to see the amazing bios that were provided for these three gentlemen. There are so many people in this space that we could have invited, but I think we came up with an amazing lineup for today that will be both informative and really interactive for folks. We hope you'll have questions that you submit in the Q&A today for all of the panelists. And while we can't get to all of those, we'll ensure that we do some follow-up as well. We're going to start off today's webinar with Sharon Clark, who's the National Director of Veterans Justice Programs at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Sean's been doing this work for many, many years. He came to the government as a Presidential Management Fellow and has his background in his Juris Doctorate. We're so excited in his leadership role in this work and excited to have him here today. Another gentleman from the government is Mr. Gregory Crawford, who serves as a correctional program specialist at the National Institute of Corrections, U.S. Department of Justice. The work that Greg's done in partnership with a number of different organizations over the years, as you've seen in his bio, is really instrumental to taking a holistic approach at meeting the needs of our veterans that are involved in the justice system, and really is the driving force behind what I would say is a really innovative way to connect in this space, our Justice Involved Veterans Network, which both myself and Mr. Clark get to serve on. And we're excited to hear about the amazing work there. And then Ray Lay, who you can see his title is the longest because his background is really diverse and amazing. And I don't want to take too much of my time to dive into your story, Ray, because I know you'll share some of that with us today. But we're honored to have you here and to be able to talk a little bit about your own journey and the amazing support that you've been able to do through a number of mechanisms, both in your federal resource jobs and your state and community level jobs as a veteran peer support specialist and expert in the field. So thank you all for your time today, and let me get us started with this amazing content by handing things over to Mr. Sharon Clark, National Director of Veterans Justice Outreach Programs. Sean, take it away.
Well, Cicely, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone on the panel and all of our hosts this afternoon and everyone who's attending. Really appreciate the chance to talk a bit about our programs in VA that are focused on justice-involved veterans, with the types of assistance that we can provide, and some opportunities for collaboration. So really, really welcome the opportunity and really grateful for it. If we could move to the first slide in this section, I always like to start here because this is an area that I think there are some pretty widespread misconceptions about the justice-involved veteran population. I think, anecdotally, I don't have evidence for this, but I think a pretty widespread one is that veterans are overrepresented in criminal justice populations. And so I like to start here. And to make a couple of points. So this graph summarizes data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics at DOJ. And they've been conducting anonymous surveys of inmates in prisons and jails since the post-Vietnam era, since the late 70s, and reporting publicly on the results of those. What you see here is the trend in veterans composition of the US adult population, so that kind of greenish bar, their share of the US prison population, the navy blue bar, and the US jail population, which is the gray bar. And as you see, as time has gone on and we get closer to the most current results from BJS, veterans are underrepresented in these criminal justice populations compared to their share of the overall US adult population. So I like to start here just kind of to level set that is not borne out by evidence, the idea that veterans are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. BJS's findings have been pointing in a different direction, in fact, since the late 90s, as they've done these surveys. As great news as that is, I think this is the trend that everyone would agree on wanting to see veterans numbers take in this area. We are still talking about a very large number of individuals in just absolute terms. So to put this in perspective, even though veterans are underrepresented in these populations, the finding from BJS for 2011 and 2012 was that 181,500 veterans were held in US prisons and jails at that time. So again, underrepresented, smaller than their share of the overall adult population, but a huge number of individuals any way you look at it. So there is lots of work for us to do, and lots of veterans who we want to help access the services that they can get through VA and other community partners as well. But always like to start there just with sort of the overview of the population and the comparison with the general US population. And if we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So organizationally, we are part of the homeless programs within the Veterans Health Administration. The VA's programs that are focused on justice-involved veterans sit there because of what you see summarized on this slide. And that is the elevated risk of homelessness that exists for justice-involved veterans and for justice-involved individuals, period. But it's certainly also true for veterans. Incarceration as an adult male is the most powerful predictor of homelessness that there is. And again, that's why we're one of the homeless programs in VA, despite the fact that many justice-involved veterans aren't currently homeless when the specialists in our programs first see them. We are a prevention program intending to keep veterans from becoming homeless, including as a result of their justice involvement. Another point that you see here that I think is very important to keep in mind when we talk about this population is that it doesn't take very long for incarceration to destroy the building blocks of stability in someone's life. And so these are the areas that we focus on with justice-involved veterans. When you think about how long it takes for being absent from a place of employment, how long it takes from being out of housing, to really loosen your grip and your ability to maintain that housing. It doesn't take a huge length of time for those bonds to begin to fray. Long-term incarceration, obviously, I think that's very intuitive. That can really wear away social and family supports that underpin all of our lives. And of course, justice-involved veterans as well. But even in a very few days, incarceration can have just such an extremely destructive effect on someone's life, on their stability, and what they're coming back to whenever that incarceration ends. So homelessness risk is not just present for veterans who are coming out of prison after a long stint incarcerated. It really is a factor for those who are coming in and out of local jails, including for brief stays as well. Homelessness is not the only negative outcome by any means that justice involvement can increase. The risk of justice-involved veterans are also at heightened risk for suicide and opioid overdose compared to veterans who receive treatment from elsewhere in VA and are not justice involved. So there are a number of negative outcomes that are more present and are greater risks for justice-involved veterans than for their non-justice involved peers. And as we'll see later, I'll mention briefly that justice-involved veterans are diagnosed with mental health and substance use disorders at high rates, very high rates. So we're serving a population in these programs that has significant treatment needs. It's at risk of multiple negative outcomes, including catastrophic ones like suicide. What do we do about this? What's our approach? And so I'm grateful for the chance to talk about that a bit. On the next slide, I won't read to you our entire mission and vision statement. Those can, at least for me, sometimes those can run together after a while. Once you see a certain number of them, mission and vision statements can start to sound the same. So I just want to pull out a few key points from this one because they really define our work in these programs in VA. The first in the mission statement is outreach. These are outreach-based programs that I'm going to be telling you a little bit about this afternoon. The Veterans Justice Programs are designed to meet justice-involved veterans where they are, and we mean that in a physical sense in normal times. This program is about physical outreach, going into prison and jail settings, going into local courthouses in a different element of the program, meeting justice-involved veterans physically where they are, it's helping them determine what they need and helping them access those services as quickly as possible. Also, I think it means meeting them where they are in a kind of in a broader sense, and understanding that not everyone is going to have the tools or the motivation or what have you to recognize when they need help, to recognize that VA may have services that can help address the issues that are present for them, and then find their own way to the medical center and present for treatment. That's not a responsible way to serve a population in need of services. So that's why our program exists. We want to project the considerable treatment capacity that VA can offer out into the community and specifically into criminal justice settings where our target population is. As I mentioned, under normal times, this means physical outreach for our staff in these settings. We're in far from normal times, as everybody knows. So what we've seen over the course of the last 10, 11 months or so is a much greater reliance on virtual outreach. In some cases, that's done over the phone where that's feasible. In other cases, we're really excited to see video-based telehealth options become a bigger part of the outreach that our specialists do. And we're excited about the future that opens up to us as far as our ability to cover wider areas of the country than we've been able to in the past. But for now, I'll just leave it there and say that we are an outreach-centered and defined program. The second point I want to pull out is access. And that is, outreach is not an end in itself. There is a purpose that's shared across all of the outreach that we do, and that is getting veterans linked to the VA healthcare and the other services that they need to get stable, maintain stability, whatever those combination of services that might mean for an individual. There is no cookie cutter approach. It's not a one size fits all strategy. This is based on an individualized assessment of what someone's needs are and an individualized response to that. That often combines VA services and services outside VA as well, where that's appropriate. Mental health and substance use disorder, like that I mentioned earlier, those are the signature treatment needs of this population. We do see those in a very large proportion of the veterans that we serve through these programs, but the list often extends well beyond that, and it can include housing issues, of course, help getting and maintaining employment, and the list goes on. But access is really at the heart of this program in addition to its outreach orientation. Last but not least is partnerships. And I can't emphasize this one enough because we couldn't do any of our work without partnerships. VA does not have a right of access to any prison facility, any jail facility, any local courthouse. We are guests in someone else's facility everywhere that we go when we go out to make contact with justice-involved veterans and to help them connect with services. It is absolutely essential that we and specialists in our program across the country build and maintain these relationships with local criminal justice authorities so that we can act at the most basic level, so that we can go find these veterans where they are. So that is a critical component of the work that they do in addition, or I should say in preparation for the work that they then do with justice-involved veterans themselves. It's got to be built on that foundation of strong partnerships with local criminal justice entities. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is where I really like to focus with this slide on what we can do for veterans who are incarcerated or who otherwise have a justice history or justice involvement. I think here to touch on another misconception that we hear about sometimes, there are different versions of it, but one is that a felony criminal record can make a veteran ineligible for VA healthcare, and that's not the case. A criminal history does not bear on a veteran's eligibility for VA healthcare. The only exception to that, and thankfully it's for a very small number of veterans, is for those who are in fugitive felon status. which means what it sounds like, someone who is in flight as a result and has an open a warrant for a felony offense. And that's not a VA policy, that's a government-wide policy, that someone who's in that status is ineligible for federally administered benefits, and that includes VA. Thankfully, again, that's a small number of individuals. But the general rule is that a criminal justice history is not going to render anyone ineligible for VA healthcare or other VA services who otherwise would have been. So that said, there is a real limitation on what we can do through these outreach programs for veterans while they're incarcerated. And that's captured in this regulation that you see on the screen right here. VA is not able to provide treatment to veterans while they are a patient or an inmate of another government agency's institution, and that agency has the duty to provide that care. That applies to veterans who are held in a prison or a jail, including those who are detained pretrial. It's not exclusive to them. It also applies in state hospitals, for example. But that is a limitation that has shaped the work that we do. That's really defined the outline of the Veterans Justice Programs. And it means that they're about outreach and linkage to services at the earliest possible point. When a veteran is incarcerated, that earliest possible point for connecting with healthcare is going to be at the time of release. So that is a key factor for us. But again, definitely don't want to lose the message that justice involvement, whether historically or in the past, or in the present, if the veteran is in the community, is not a bar to VA healthcare. It's just while a veteran is incarcerated in a prison or a jail facility that VA is not able to deliver treatment. And in that case, the intervention is outreach and planning to access those services at the point of release. So on the next slide, I've been talking about these programs and haven't really provided a lot of detail about what they are. This is a side-by-side view of the two justice programs, and there are two. So VJP is Veterans Justice Programs, and those programs are VJO, Veterans Justice Outreach, and HCRV, Healthcare for Reentry Veterans. HCRV is actually the older of these two programs. It is focused on veterans who are coming out of state and federal prison. That was VA's first national program specifically directed at justice-involved veterans, and that was the intervention that VA started with, those who were coming out of state and federal prison and assisting them with that transition and linking up to services as needed at that point. That started in 2007. In 2009, VA formally launched Veterans Justice Outreach, or VJO, which is now the larger of those two programs when you look at the number of staff that we have deployed across the country, and it's focused on the front end of the criminal justice system. So every intercept in the sequential intercept model prior to reentry is the focus of Veterans Justice Outreach. So in practice, that means outreach in local jail facilities. It means contact with local law enforcement that often includes training and education for local law enforcement agencies about VA resources and potentially how to access them for veterans that they encounter in crisis. And it means veterans treatment courts in particular. That's I think the work that we're best known for across all of the justice programs, because veterans treatment courts, as you likely are well aware, have spread really rapidly across the country over the past 12, 13 years or so that they've been in existence. And have gotten a lot of positive attention as a result of that. They get a lot of coverage in the media, and rightly so. We're very proud to be a part of those courts, naturally. What I would say about these two programs is, in addition to the differences, the concept and the point is the same. We really are talking about one intervention that's delivered across different settings in the criminal justice system, and it looks a little bit different as a result. The purpose of all of this is what I mentioned earlier, and that's outreach, assessment of a veteran's individual needs, linkage to services at the earliest possible point. These programs look a little bit different because that intervention is happening at the front end versus the back end of a veteran's journey through the criminal justice system. But the point and kind of the core of the identity of these programs is the same, and certainly so is their intent. That can also mean that veterans' needs are significantly different. So where a veteran is, that we're meeting them, not just physically, but in terms of their needs and what they need assistance with, can be very different when you're talking about a veteran who maybe just did a weekend in a local jail compared to a veteran who's planning to re-enter a community after spending 20 years in state prison. Can be very different situations coming out of those two different cases. The 400 plus specialists that we have deployed across these programs are at every VA medical center across the country. Most medical centers now have more than one specialist as the program has continued to grow. They're licensed independent clinicians. In practice, most of them are clinical social workers, although we do have some representation from other disciplines as well. And their focus is really as a boundary spanner. To borrow a term that I know that SAMHSA uses all the time, and I apologize if I should put quotes around it. I don't want to have a copyright violation or anything like that, but that really defines what we look for from justice specialists in the VA. They need to, be able to get veterans from point A to point B, where B is treatment and other services that are responsive to veterans' individual needs. That requires being well-versed in and knowing how to navigate multiple big institutions. VA is one for sure, but also so are the systems that specialists are conducting outreach in and are engaging veterans while they're in. The criminal justice system is itself a complex animal, and so specialists need to be versed in both. So a quick overview of the two programs. I mentioned on the next slide, here's a little bit more detail about our partnership with the courts, veterans treatment courts in particular. As I said, this is what we're best known for to the extent that we're known to the public, and that's because of the high visibility of the veterans treatment court model and the speed that it's spread across the country, starting with Judge Russell's court in Buffalo back in 2008. It's important to note, going back to the partnership theme, that VA is a partner and ultimately a guest in these courts. So this is, we get questions about this sometimes that assume that we establish, fund, operate, or otherwise control what these courts look like, the types of offenses they will admit participants who have active charges for, and that's not the case. We're there as a treatment provider. And the VJO specialist is there as the liaison between the VA Medical Center, where the veteran participants in a veterans treatment court are receiving care, and the judge and the other members of that treatment team. We don't have a say in these courts' eligibility criteria or in their operations. So that's important to clarify. We are grateful for the opportunity to be partners in those settings. But we're, again, our role is focused on healthcare and on making sure that the judge and the other members of the team understand what the current status of a veteran's treatment is, so that the judge can keep the case moving forward as it should in an informed way. Quick word about courts. Oh, I'll also say, I always like to note, because this number goes up every time I talk about it, the first court, as I mentioned, was in 2008 in Buffalo, New York. We now have specialists active in 601 of these courts across the United States. So really phenomenal spread of this model across the country in a relatively short amount of time. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned earlier that the veterans we serve in these programs have really significant clinical needs, and here's a little bit more detail on that. The majority of the veterans that we serve in the Veterans Justice Outreach Program receive a mental health or a substance use diagnosis. Nearly half of them receive both, so end up being dually diagnosed. Once they have their initial outreach contact with a VJO specialist, they're linked to treatment. More than half, almost half, receive both a diagnosis of a mental health issue and a substance use disorder. So I mentioned earlier that this is a population with significant treatment needs. I think this really makes that very clear, that this is an issue that's present for the majority of the veterans that we're working with, certainly one of these clinical issues or another. And the list often extends, quite a bit beyond that, what an individual veteran's clinical needs might be. But I think that I mentioned that these are the signature treatment needs that we see in these programs. And I think that's a good introduction to the idea of what the depth of the service need can be. Opioid use disorder in particular is an issue of concern for our program and for the VA healthcare system more generally. And we do see significantly higher rates of opioid use disorder in the justice-involved veteran population that we're serving than VHA as a whole, so the entire VA healthcare system sees in the general veteran population. That runs about 1%. Of veterans served elsewhere in VHA that have that diagnosis. And of course, we see 4 to 11% of it across these 2 different programs. So a major issue and a major focus of specialist work, getting veterans connected to responsive services to deal with those issues. And more about that on the next slide. Which is the good news. VJO and HCRV specialists are very effective at getting the veterans that they see through outreach in criminal justice settings into responsive treatment services through the VA. So this is a busy slide visually. I apologize for that. It's a little bit dense. But what we see here is that veterans who have that initial outreach contact with a specialist in one of our program do go on to access those responsive services at very, very high rates. And so contact with one of our specialists bodes well for the likelihood that a veteran is going to get those responsive services and is going to be able to stay in them over time. Those aren't always the only needs, as I mentioned before, that justice-involved veterans need to address, but they're often foundational to other efforts that veterans will need help with. For example, getting and maintaining employment. It can be very important to address, underlying clinical issues, whether before or alongside efforts to help someone secure and to stay in employment. So this really is, I would say, the core of the work, but it's not the whole story. There is a much wider array of services that are available through the VA in all its different components, including but not limited to the homeless programs, which we're a part of. And so feel duty bound to cite homeless programs and all the many resources that are available there. But the VJO and the HCRV specialist is the pathway for a justice-involved veteran to get into all of those. Once a veteran gets into the system, those services are available in a wraparound fashion. VA is an integrated health system that provides a wider array of services than most other healthcare systems. It really is in a unique position to deliver many different interventions for a veteran at the same time, including many that go beyond the sort of the common definition of healthcare outside the VA context. Homeless programs are a great example of that as well. So I will move to what I think will probably be the most important slide of my entire talk, which is the next one, that is how to contact the specialists nearest to you. They are listed by VA Medical Center for the VJO program on the VJO website, which is the first one here, and by state for healthcare for reentry veterans, which is the second bullet. You can email specialists directly from these websites. That's intentional. We want specialists to be accessible. So in addition to their work conducting outreach physically or virtually in these criminal justice settings, we want them to be as accessible as possible to be able to serve our population. And so you can make direct contact with them from the website. I'm afraid I duplicated the links on the next slide. I apologize about that. And I think that we're holding questions till the end. But our final slide of this section has contact information for myself and for my colleagues in the Veterans Justice Programs Office. And so if you have questions about these programs, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will cap it there. I hope I haven't gone too far over my time and yammered on for too long. I have a bad habit of doing that. But I really appreciate the chance to speak with you this afternoon. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Cicely.
Thanks so much, Sean. No, great job. Already questions coming into the box for the Q&A. So please note that all of our presenters, after they're done their presentation, will be taking a look at those and working with our friends at the National Council to identify answers to those. Some of those questions we can answer live. In particular, I know a number of folks are asking about eligibility status, and so being able to also find out about more resources there with your program. So thanks again, Sean, and we're going to hand things over to Greg Crawford, the Correctional Program Specialist with the National Institute of Corrections over at DOJ. Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Cicely. Just want to give participants a moment here to read this quote, and then we'll get started. All right, next slide. As Cicely mentioned, my name is Greg Crawford. I'm a correctional program specialist at the National Institute of Corrections. I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. First of all, I'm a veteran. I served overseas in the United States Air Force in Greece and Germany. I didn't see any combat, but I did experience military culture, being away from family and friends for long stretches, the close bond that's developed with those that you serve with, and also some of the challenges of trying to adapt back to civilian life. After I served in the military, I used my GI Bill and finished my bachelor's degree at Washington State University. I spent a year working at a juvenile institution and 3 years working at a community-based mental health agency. It's in this last job that I go into jails and prisons to evaluate mental health clients and assist in linking these clients with appropriate services to help them stabilize in the community. And it's this experience that really helped me understand the critical importance of taking that holistic approach to working with folks involved in the justice system, and in particular, justice-involved veterans. So after working at a mental health agency, I served 11 years in a local probation department, and I see that some of my former colleagues have joined the call here today at Pierce County, Tacoma, Washington. But when I was there, I served numerous roles, such as a probation officer. I supervised a domestic violence unit, briefly left Pierce County, went up to King County and served as the probation director, and then back to Pierce County, where I managed alternative programs such as day reporting, work crew, and community service. In 2012, I left Pierce County for the National Institute of Corrections in Washington, D.C., where I currently serve as the correctional program specialist on the community service division. NIC also has a jails and prisons division in Washington, D.C., along with an information center and academy division in Aurora, Colorado. We have 2 locations. But I'll dive a little bit deeper into my time at Pierce County and how I got started at NIC on the Veterans Compendium Project in just a moment. But first, let's take a quick look at the training objectives for today. So I'm not going to read all this. You can see it as well as I can. But basically, we're going to talk about the Compendium Project today. And I want you to have a little bit more of an understanding of the impact of the invisible wounds of war. And we're going to talk a little bit about strategies for criminal justice professionals to more effectively work with justice-involved veterans and kind of help them navigate the criminal justice system. So next slide. So as I mentioned, I started working in probation in Pierce County just after 9/11, actually, in Tacoma, Washington, which is just up the road from Joint Base Lewis McChord. And at that time, we didn't have veterans treatment courts or specialized housing units for veterans in our local jails. We didn't have law enforcement crisis teams trained to deal with veterans that became, in crisis in the local community. And, as you can imagine, after a few years of the war following the 9/11 attacks, soldiers started returning home from Afghanistan and Iraq. And as many of you can probably relate, we started seeing a large influx of active duty on our and veterans on our caseloads. Next slide. War changes people. They used to call it combat fatigue or soldier's heart, but PTSD by any other name, it can really still wreck lives. And as some of my colleagues have experienced, as a probation officer at the time, supervising largely domestic violence cases, we would typically just supervise the charge and not any of the underlying issues that contributed to a veteran's involvement in the justice system. For instance, we do domestic violence. We'd supervise them for a domestic violence assessment, DV treatment, DV victims panel, but we wouldn't touch the PTSD or the traumatic brain injury or any of the other service-related mental health issues. The veterans we'd supervise would just sit before us broken. Their careers were ruined, their families were shattered, and it was really a helpless feeling. So as I mentioned, in 2012, I left Pierce County for the National Institute of Corrections, and shortly after my arrival, my then supervisor, Jim Cosby, walked by my office and he said, "I want you to do something about veterans." And at the time, I didn't really know what he meant. I started attending veteran-related meetings and conferences. I met some key people, including author Bernard Edelman, who has authored and helped edit all 4 of NIC's national publications for the Veterans Compendium Project, which we'll talk about in a moment. Met Melissa Fitzgerald, former director for Justice for Vets, who helped really pave the way for me to meet a lot of influential people that were passionate about helping justice-involved veterans. And of course, my colleague here, Sharon Clark, who's been tremendously supportive of our work from the VA, to name a few. But this, quite frankly, is been the most rewarding work of my career. In the nearly 9 years I've been at the National Institute of Corrections, I do think our justice system is getting better. I think we've come a long way in how we manage our justice-involved veteran population. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And slide 7, next slide, please. But as Sean mentioned, it all starts with Judge Robert Russell. The first Veterans Treatment Court was created up in Buffalo, New York, back in 2008 with Judge Russell. And what he started is simply amazing. We now have more than 600, and Sean mentioned that as well, Veterans Treatment Courts across the country. But more than that, I think Judge Russell brought an awareness to the entire justice system and an understanding that we can and should do more to help our veterans who are in crisis. And for those veterans who find themselves involved in the justice system, I believe Judge Russell inspired many efforts across the spectrum of justice, and his leadership has simply been transformational. We now have specialized programming for veterans in our local jails and prisons. We now have law enforcement units trained on military culture that know how to respond to a veteran in crisis in the community. Next slide, please. I'm truly proud of the work that we've done and to be a part of an effort of doing more to help veterans who may be struggling. I'm proud to provide agencies across the country with resources and ideas to build a better way to handle justice-involved veterans at any point in the criminal justice system, whether it's in the community, with law enforcement, in the jail, in the court system, or in prison. At NIC, I never set out to stand up veterans courts or a vet jail or prison pod. I've always tried to identify gaps in the field and to develop projects and resources to fill those gaps. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the publications and some of the signature sections of the Compendium Project publications. And the first one is key because you're thinking about starting a veterans response team to work with troubled vets or veterans treatment court or a jail pod. This section is designed to stimulate ideas, to get our readers thinking about the right questions to be asking as you're thinking about starting a veteran-specific program in your jurisdiction. The key thing to remember is you need to identify who your champion is, who's going to move the ball forward and be that tireless leader that makes sure there's progress, accountability, and that things keep moving in the right direction. And the thing about veteran-specific program that is really critical, it doesn't have to be perfect out of the gates. It can evolve and grow over time. The important thing is that you work together, you collaborate, you communicate openly, you share resources, and you develop a common goal and vision for your program. Next slide, please. This is really important. One in their own words is a great section. It's another signature of our publications. These are the stories of the heroes and champions that tell us their story. They tell us about their programs. And one of the things that was really important to both myself and Bernie Edelman is that these publications aren't just words and data, that they illuminate, that they're interesting. We don't want them just sitting on a government shelf collecting dust. Next slide, please. Another key piece is all of you. It's the folks actually doing the work, and we try to highlight multiple jurisdictions in each of these publications. I think it's important for our readers to get a sample of what other folks are doing. It gives ideas for starting or building upon existing programs. Not every jurisdiction will be the same or have the same resources, but there are key components that should be there. A simple example is the VA, the VJO specialist or an HCRV specialist. But there will be nuances and things that are specific to a site that might not be able to be replicated. You have to take the key components and then add your area specific ideas and resources and make it your own. Next slide, please. This is another NIC funded network, the Justice Involved Veterans Network, or JIVN. It's a network of community, state, and local and federal partners that identifies and develops innovative and holistic approaches to assist justice involved veterans. This network was established in 2016. It started as a working group. It was the intent of having representatives from the community, law enforcement, the jail and prison, and vet courts to help us identify these gaps in the field that I talked about, and to build resources and help myself and leadership of the National Institute of Corrections sort of keep a finger on the pulse of the field. Next slide, please. NIC and the Justice Involved Veterans Network collaborated with the Library of Congress and the Veterans History Project on 3 separate panel events to bring education and awareness to post-traumatic stress disorder. This is an important collaboration that we're able to reach thousands of viewers and listeners to share stories and resources and just talk about PTSD and how it impacts veterans and how we can help by starting and improving veteran-specific programming in the justice system. Next slide, please. I'm trying to shoot through this pretty quick because I want to be respectful of Ray getting an opportunity to talk and tell his story. But so the Veterans Treatment Court Enhancement Initiative and Victor, Veteran Informed Care Training on Responsivity, are two really neat projects that I'm very proud of and I think you'll find interesting and of value, and I'll get into them in the next couple of slides. Go ahead. So NIC and the Bureau of Justice Assistance partnered with the Center for Court Innovation to develop the first set of specialized screening, assessment, and case planning tools for veterans treatment courts. It was done by incorporating the latest research on trauma, substance abuse disorders, and other issues affecting veterans. These tools are designed to help veterans treatment courts meet the special needs of justice-involved veterans. And I'm going to tell a quick story. This idea actually came about in 2013 at the first Veterans Treatment Court Conference. I was actually in attendance at a presentation by Sean Clark in the VA, and one of the audience members asked if there was a risk tool, and I don't remember if it was Joel or Sean who responded, but they said there was not a risk tool specific to veterans, and that kind of lit a fire for me, and I came back and asked for some funding, and I was supported. But we're now in phase 2, and I'm now working with American University, and in some part due to COVID, we have now automated all of the risk tools, both the short screener, the comprehensive risk assessment, and the case planning protocol, and along with all of the training to help implement these tools. It's all now virtual. In fact, in phase 1, we pilot tested the tools in 3 sites. In phase 2, we've implemented both the virtual training and the automated tools in 4 jurisdictions. The project will continue as a collaboration with the Bureau of Justice Assistance and American University over the next couple of years. My colleague and partner at American University, Dr. Julie Baldwin, plans to implement 6 to 10 sites this calendar year and more the following year. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to reach out to Dr. Baldwin. You can see the email address in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. It's if you're calling in and you can't see it, it's jbaldwin@american.edu. But if you'd like more in-depth understanding of this project and the tools, we are doing a workshop at the American Probation and Parole Association's Winter Training Institute in February. Next slide, please. And this is Victor. This is Veteran Informed Care Training on Responsivity. It's a curriculum that we developed that focuses on the responsivity issues of justice-involved veterans, looking at things like military culture, service-related trauma, difficulties of transitioning from military to civilian life, and building basic skills for staff to more effectively manage the veterans on their caseloads. This curriculum has been pilot tested and is now being updated and converted into an e-course in partnership with Temple University. So I'm working on that right now. We should have, hopefully have this resource available to you fairly soon. Next slide, please. This is actually the Intercept model that I worked collaboratively with SAMHSA and the VA and members of the Justice Involved Veterans Network to adapt this model to the justice involved veteran population. And if you go, you're going to see on the next slide, you're going to see all of our resources on our microsite, including the Intercept model adapted to the veteran population, where if you, actually, I want you to go back 1 slide, if you don't mind. So if you look at Intercept 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth, if you hover over each of those intercepts, you can actually click on and there'll be resources at each of those intercepts for agencies. So when you get to the microsite, and we'll share that link for you in the next slide. On the left-hand side, if you go to that link, you can see all of our resources. It describes all of our projects. If you go under the media tab, we have webinars, live broadcasts, interviews, and there's things that you can actually download and free for you to use in any PowerPoint presentations you might be making. We have lots of video clips about PTSD and interviews with folks that you might find useful. So please take a look. At this time, Cicely, I'm gonna turn it back to you, and I know we'll talk about questions later. So I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Greg. And now we'll hand this off to Ray. And again, we're getting some great questions in the chat box. We'll try to address as many of those as possible. But I think it'll be really important to hear a little bit about Ray's personal experience and some of the services that he's been able to firsthand both experience and support within his roles in his community there in Indiana and across the nation. So Ray, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you so much. And you may be muted. Don't forget the mute.
Thank you, Cicely. I hope you can hear me good now. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Philip. Thank you to the National Council, SAMHSA, and to all of the listeners and supporters. Thank you very, very much to all of my fellow veterans, and allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ray Lay. I am a formerly homeless, honorably discharged United States Marine. I live with and I am in recovery with a dual diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and polysubstance abuse issues. By the grace of God and a little effort on my part, it's been over 13 years since I last had any kind of illegal drug or alcohol. And it's been approximately 16 years since I was last hospitalized for my mental health condition. Today I am a volunteer Veteran Administration peer support specialist and Indiana certified recovery specialist and community health worker, and also a forensic peer support specialist. The forensic, for those of you who may not know, is for those who have been involved with the criminal justice system. While I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, after I had been charged with something that I did not do, I was being punished and I suffered a psychotic break. That psychotic break was so bad that to this day, I do not remember it. But I have since found out that that's part of the knowledge of psychosis, loss of contact with reality, and which I experienced. That psychotic break has led me to a lot of old woe po me, and also a long bout of my feeble attempt at self-medication, which also led me to rob a man of some empty Coca-Cola bottles, which helped me to receive a 12-year sentence in the Indiana Department of Corrections. I spent 7 years of my life at the Indiana Department of Corrections, undiagnosed, because when I suffered that psychotic break in the Marine Corps, instead of the doctor trying to address my condition, he recommended that I receive a bad conduct discharge. If I could find that doctor now, I'd probably hug him. For the simple reason that it was actually my work. It was for me to work. And I say that to my fellow veterans. Please do not look to the VA to work for you. They will work with you. Me, myself, when I finally accepted my condition, I realized that illegal drugs and alcohol wasn't going to help me. I stopped drinking and drugging May the 12th, 2007. I have not had a drink or an illegal drug since. And I threw myself into what I call getting off the pity pot and working with others. And part of that was seeking out research to learn what it is about my condition, even though at that time I did not have a direct diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. My diagnosis at that time was psychotic disorder, NOS, rule out schizophrenia, rule out schizoaffective disorder. And believe it or not, it still took many years for my current psychiatrist, who is a VA psychiatrist, Dr. Alexander Nicolescu, to realize and change my diagnosis from psychotic disorder, NOS, to schizoaffective disorder after he saw my service medical records. That led me to this, what I consider never-ending journey to learn how to learn more about my condition and how my condition intersects with my diagnosis. Part of that was my journey is research. I am fortunate that I have at Routerbush VA Medical Center one of the world's greatest researchers, believe it or not. He is very well published. His name is Dr. Paul Lysacker. Any veterans out there with any type of mental health conditions, if you get the opportunity to participate in any kind of research, please go for it and just be honest with yourself. Go after it. I mean, because, hey, I'm not going to say what you got to lose, but please believe in everything that you can gain. You can regain more of that love for yourself. Help bring yourself home, or at least develop the home that you would like to have. And I can wholeheartedly state that because I'm coming to you from my home after over 10 years being homeless. I read what we call at that time, it was a newsletter for our VA Medical Center. At that time, it was called This and That. And it talked about the domiciliary. A domiciliary is a place for veterans who are experiencing mental health and substance abuse issues. And those part of that issue was stating about peer support specialists. And I said, wait a minute, what is this? And I started looking because it was saying about people who have been involved with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, or incarceration or homelessness. I mean, and you get the opportunity to work with others who might be there. I said, wait a minute, somebody looked over my shoulder in my life because that's me. And I started looking and I found part of a way to become first the Indiana Certified Recovery Specialist, community health worker. And after that, I started talking with our local recovery coordinator, Dr. Scott Patterson, concerning becoming a veteran peer support specialist. And after the books and some volunteer assignments, I actually took the test and I became a Veteran Administration Peer Support Specialist October the 12th, 2012. And I prefer in maintaining my volunteer status for the simple reason my main job is to live with my condition. Living with schizoaffective disorder, I hear voices and entertain delusions that others do not. I have to maintain that iota of reality in order to live as best as I possibly can. And I think I'm living okay. Today, I am a member of the board of directors with NAMI Indiana, a member of the board of directors with, recently rolled off the Indiana Balance of State Continuum Care after 6 years. What they do, they are the collaborative applicant for HUD to help house persons throughout 91 of the 92 counties in the state of Indiana. And I am a member of the board of directors for the Coalition for Homelessness Intervention and Prevention, which is county number 92, Marion County, Indiana. And with that, we do the same thing, but for Marion County. I have had for lack of a better way to put it, a great life. Despite the fact I have cried a lot. I have hollered, oh, woe, po me, a lot. I spent 3 years of my life in a mental institution. I spent 7 years of my life at the Indiana State Prison. But one thing that I am very, very proud of, I have not spent a night in a prison since July the 17th, 1986. Instead, now I get to go into prisons here in the state of Indiana, and I help train correctional officers on mental health issues. I also get to have now positive interactions with police officers as I help train police officers at the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy on mental health issues. These things that I get that opportunity to do, I think they also came about because in April of 2016, I was asked to be a part of a panel in Washington, D.C. for the Stepping Up Initiative. I was on a panel with Pete Early, a Pulitzer-nominated author whose son is also a person with a severe mental illness, and he developed bipolar disorder and had a lot of negative interactions with police. And that panel was moderated by Dr. Rana Parekh. But after the panel was over, this young man come up to me and he talked with me. Come to find out, this young man is Secretary of Corrections still today for the state of Pennsylvania. And he told me about forensic peer support. And just so happened, he didn't give me any directions, but just so happened that afternoon, I met Dr. Don Noggle from the Maricopa County Mental Health Department. And she also talked about forensic peer support. And me being a veteran who has been in prison, living with a mental health condition, I said, wow, is this part of what I'm supposed to be doing? Well, I communicated with Dr. Noggle, and with the help of our former bureau chief, Jill Fuquay, we were able to develop that program here in the state of Indiana. And we are utilizing that program, but I do not believe to the fullest extent that is possible. When we first instituted that very first class, our current bureau chief of Consumer and Family Affairs, Miss Amy Brinkley, she was sitting beside me and she graduated, but she's the current bureau chief. She works with a lot of people throughout the state of Indiana and does some great things. But one thing which they did, when I say they, I also have to include her boss. Her boss is also an attorney, Mr. Jay Chowdhury, who they funded me to work with my county of which I was sentenced to prison from, to work with persons. And I had that opportunity to work with some vets there also. That's Lake County, Indiana. And I'm kind of more than sure we're not done there yet. But back here in Marion County, there was a correctional facility called the Indianapolis Reentry Educational Facility. And Miss Kim Boyd asked would I go out there and try to work with some of the vets out there. And come to find out that another person who she is an accredited Veterans Administration benefits counselor, agent, my fault, Mrs. Madonna Richardson, also asked me at the same time. And I said, well, why not? And this is one thing that I'm very proud of. I got that opportunity to work with a lot of vets out there. And even though they have since shut that place down, one thing is for sure, I'm very proud of. None of those vets that I had that honor to work with have returned to prison. They have all, just as Sean was showing how he had those great outcomes. These veterans that I have had that honor to work with, they have went ahead and addressed and accepted their mental health conditions, realize that they cannot beat those substance abuse issues, that is a dead end street, and they have turned away from it. And instead put those energies into their families. And man, just to see where some of them are at today just makes me feel like all of my crying was worth it. Just today, another veteran who I met while I had created a program at the domiciliary where I graduated from. I met him there, and a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity and honor to help train this veteran to become an Indiana certified recovery specialist and community health worker. He called me a few minutes before we went on air and told me he just passed his test. He is actually now a certified recovery specialist. And if he's listening, I'm gonna tell him, hey, now you can get ready and tighten the saddle up, because I'm finna ride you, brother. I'm finna ride you all the way till you become a Veteran Administration peer support specialist, and work with some more of our fellow vets who might be struggling with this issue of justice involvement. Today, I am not on parole, no probation, no house arrest, none of that. But yet I still do have that honor to work with a lot of vets. I have had the honor to go into the prison and literally bring some veterans out of there, and they're still out. That's what makes me feel good. That's what makes me feel that all of my crime, it was worth it, because I realized that there's more to life than just me. There's our fellow human beings. And on the veteran aspect, I got nothing but pure love. My daddy was a veteran. My daddy was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. I watched one of my brothers, who was also a United States Marine, die from complications of Agent Orange 25 years after he left Vietnam. He was sprayed directly 3 times. I still love him. I love all my other brothers. They are also Army. So I realized that, as far as I'm concerned, there is almost no higher calling than that of being a vet, okay, to serve our country, to serve something which is much, much bigger than us. And a lot of us do have intersections while we are on active duty, which we take a wrong road. And a lot of times that road is substance abuse. I am a proud United States Marine. And unfortunately, the Marine Corps was born in a tavern. And every 10 November, we used to drink to the birth of the Marine Corps. Man, if I'd have knew what I know now, I'd have ran away. All right, ran away, ducked up under the table or something. Because alcohol, illegal drugs, and my mental health condition do not mix. And I make it my business now to stay away from it like the plague that it is. And I most definitely will always have a special place in my heart for my Marine Corps, but there's no room for alcohol or illegal drugs, because every time I go to a prison now, I want to leave out after approximately an hour or so. And Gregory, because thank you very much for creating that program, and all those persons that are working with you. Sharon, thank you very, very much for all the work that you do. We are also working right now to help create a VJO, peer support specialist billet with our VJO. I will probably try to lead the way. We have also been able to hire a full-time peer support specialist with our MICM team. I fit real good in with the MICM team. I am a person with a severe mental illness. MICM, for the 40 units that are around the country, thank you very, very much. I'm very proud of the work that I did with MICM. Quite a few vets. I've met quite a few vets who also are just like me, and quite a few who were just as involved. But at one time in my life, I was a dope dealer. I consider myself now a hope dealer. And you know what? I love being a hope dealer much, much more than being the dope dealer. Okay. And Sean, whether you know this or not, or Gregory, whether you know this or not, you are now hope dealers. And I hope we all meet some more and continue on peddling this hope. Okay. Because, hey, hope is beautiful, baby. And you know what? Even though it's intangible, it can have tangible results. How do I know? I'm sitting in my home. I'll turn it back over to you, Cicely.
Thank you so much, Ray. I got a tear of joy and hope in my eye right now after listening to your amazing story, your amazing words of inspiration, and congratulations, sir, on reaching so many milestones, but mostly for reaching so many fellow veterans and helping them identify where their next steps can be on a path of recovery. So thank you, sir. Inspiration all around, from understanding that we have programs out there to support our veterans who have a connection to the criminal justice system, to support others within their recovery and reentry back into communities after a stay within those systems, if that is the path that they end up being on. So many questions. Let us get started with Alexandra to dive into a few of these. We will work as a panel to identify and respond to some in the actual chat box as well with all of you. But please know we will work hard, and anything that you need responded to that you don't hear from the SMVF TA Center will work on doing some follow-up too. So Alexandra, I'll hand it back to you to get us started.
Great, thank you so much, Cicely, and thanks to all our panelists for a really enlightening hour or so, and so many questions. So we're going to try to get to as many as we can. We want to start, we've seen a number of questions with folks asking for more information about some resources for family members, what family supports are available. So I do want to let our panel take turns at answering. Perhaps I'll open it to Gregory first, if you have anything you might be willing to share. Or Sean, whoever would like to jump in.
What's the question, Alexandra?
Folks have been asking about what resources there might be out there for family members and for family supports that are available. So wondering if any of you can speak to that a little from your various perspectives.
Our resources are sort of geared towards criminal justice agencies. Sure. So I don't have any other NICs.
Sean or Ray, any thoughts?
Well, sure. In the VA generally, so our services in the justice outreach programs, our eligibility criteria are the same as the VA's healthcare eligibility criteria as a whole. We don't have a separate authority to serve family members. That said, in the VA system, there are a number of new or somewhat new programs that do have authority to serve veterans and family members. One example is Supportive Services for Veteran Families, or SSVF. If you take a look, that is a very large grant program that operates nationwide, and it is intended to prevent veteran families from falling into homelessness. And that can provide grantees in that program can provide veterans and their family members with a wide variety of types of direct support to keep veteran families intact and in housing, or to help them rapidly exit homelessness if they've fallen into it. So needs such as childcare, security and utility deposits when moving into a new place, those very nuts and bolts kind of immediate needs that can be the difference between someone getting into or staying in housing and not. Those types of resources are available through SSVF. And again, that's Supportive Services for Veteran Families. That's just one example. That's one of the homeless programs, so kind of close to home for us in the justice programs. But there are, I know there are other examples elsewhere in the VA healthcare system as well. But by and large, VA services are focused on veterans themselves, and there's some development in the direction of family members, but by and large, VA services are by statute limited to veterans themselves.
But just, if I may,
Sure.
Just to piggyback on what Sean said, on more than one occasion, I have, doing my duties with the MICM team. MICM, for those of you who do not know, means Mental Health Intensive Case Management. And we intersected at times with SSVF grantees, okay, organizations. And I would also have that opportunity working with my licensed clinical social workers who I was working with to refer some vets to the SSVF program. And sometimes those veterans had dependents, and that way their families could also participate. But the other aspect on that is I am a proud member of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which does work for persons with mental health conditions and their families. I wish I would have knew about NAMI before my acceptance of my condition, because my family suffered more than I did. Mental health. Mental health is something that no one asks for, but it happens to a lot of us. And unfortunately, I'm gonna say it this way, it's kind of like a byproduct of military service, or it's a possibility to be a byproduct of military service. All right. Okay, thank you.
And sorry, Alexander, one other thing I should have mentioned, this is a big gap that I left as far as VA's ability to work with family members, the vet centers. So also known as the Readjustment Counseling Service, the vet centers, there are 300 of them across the country. They are part of the VA healthcare system and not at the same time. They maintain a distinct records keeping system. Their eligibility criteria are different and broader than the rest of the VA healthcare system. And that includes flexibility to serve veterans and their families in some different counseling contexts. So I was remiss not mentioning at the beginning that vet center resources often are available for veterans and their family members as well.
And Alexandra, this is Cicely. I was going to jump in and just remind folks about the SAMHSA help hotline for identifying resources. One of the things that we think about when we approach working with military and veteran families at SAMHSA is that need to recognize that VA and some of our partners in other federal systems don't necessarily have the legislative authority to support folks that didn't serve or don't have that DD 214 directly. But we all know that families serve alongside their service member and veteran. And so that resource is something we can put into this event as well, the 800-662-HELP, which is able to link folks to resources in their local community, as well as the fact that SAMHSA's been doing some amazing work with our partners at VA in organizing communities to be there to support veterans through our Governor's Challenge. And through that, recognizing just how many amazing resources state departments of Veterans Affairs through their governor's offices are putting in place to support families as well. So please also take a look outside of just the federal system to your state partners too.
Great, thank you all. A question has come in asking, can a veteran receive services from the VA and from a behavioral health provider at the same time?
Yes.
Yes,
I do.
So I would say too that you know, most of the veterans who we see in the justice programs, one of the first things that a specialist does is to link them with a VA behavioral health provider. So we are, of course, a full service healthcare system in the VA, and that is, you know, one of the predominant treatment needs for a lot of the justice involved veterans that we see through outreach. And that's, again, one of the first things that a specialist would do. If a veteran, for whatever reason, you know, turns out not to be eligible for VA healthcare, you know, the specialist would then work to refer the veteran to community services as needed. And also by choice, in some cases, we have veterans who are VA eligible, for example, maybe participating in a veterans treatment court and may elect to receive some services from VA, other services from a community provider that may be connected with that court. We do see that as well. So there's absolutely no exclusivity principle that just because you're receiving one thing from VA, that requires you to receive everything from VA if there are other options available.
Great, thank you, Sean. Would any other folks like to weigh in on that question?
Yes. I receive treatment from both VA and outside of VA. I receive mental health treatment outside of VA, and I receive primary care outside of VA. I was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer, and the VA is who diagnosed me. But yet I utilized my outside and I went to the Cleveland Clinic. The VA offered me totally beautiful, good treatment. The Cleveland Clinic explained it a little bit better. And I allowed them to cut my prostates out. And as far as I know, as of right now, I am cancer free. So I'm grateful regardless, either way it goes, because I still receive treatment at the VA. I'm not going to ever leave the VA. You're going to have to get me out of there kicking and screaming. Okay? And I'm going to scream real loud too. Excuse me. All right. But please believe me, I advocate for the VA. On more than one occasion, I have literally went into the inpatient unit and brought vets out of there. And when I tell those vets that I live with a severe mental illness, they ask me, what the VA do for you? And I'll tell them straight up, it wasn't what the VA did for me. The VA got all kinds of resources available to us, okay? But we have to reach out there and accept them and work with them, all right? There's no way it doesn't happen because the VA comes up and sprinkles some magic dust on you. You have to work on it.
Makes sense, and thank you all for your inputs there. We have a specific question. What, if any, assistance can the VJPs of the VA provide to veterans awaiting OCR services while incarcerated in county jails? And how do local sheriff departments gain access to these services? So, Sharon, I believe this question may be for you.
Sure. So while a veteran's incarcerated, as I mentioned before, we're not able to deliver any treatment services because in that case, that would be the duty of the county. What a specialist could do in those circumstances is to meet with the veteran, assess his or her needs, and then work on a plan to get the veteran connected to services as soon as possible after release. Once that duty no longer existed on the part of the county and once the veteran was eligible for VA healthcare again. That would be the intervention that a specialist could offer at that point. And as far as how to get that service, I would encourage a sheriff's office or anyone in a jurisdiction that doesn't have a VJO partnership to reach out to the specialist who covers their area on our website and start building that relationship.
Great, thank you. We have another question asking, do veterans have to be honorably discharged prior to obtaining a felony charge in order to be eligible for assistance? I just want to clarify if a veteran who has been dishonorably discharged and receives a felony charge, if they would or would not qualify for justice-specific services.
Well, so first, there isn't a limitation that we only work with veterans who have felony charges or felony convictions. There are no offense-based criteria for being served by a VJO or an HCRV specialist. So we can work with charges of at any level. That's not one of our criteria. Our criteria, as I mentioned before, are VA healthcare eligibility criteria. And what I would say about the dishonorable discharge question is we encourage every veteran to apply for enrollment in VA healthcare. Even when there is a dishonorable discharge or another kind of bad paper discharge in the mix that may have prevented someone from applying in the past, there can be a number of issues that may make that veteran eligible for some or all VA healthcare services that he or she would need. That can include multiple periods of service. If there was a dishonorable discharge, maybe that was the last discharge, but if there was a previous discharge from an earlier period of service that is qualifying, the veteran can be eligible for VA healthcare on the basis of that earlier discharge. So I would encourage everyone not to assume that just because a veteran's service ultimately ended with a dishonorable discharge, that's the end of the story. And in many cases, especially with multiple service periods, there can be another DD 214 to work with that'll help a veteran get eligible. The other thing to say is that VA healthcare standards in general change over time, and they change in the direction of inclusivity. So there are options for veterans who have different characters of discharge accessing all or some subset of VA healthcare services that didn't exist even just a few years ago. So the guidance we give is always the same: apply for enrollment, regardless of whether you may have been told in the past by someone that you likely weren't going to be eligible, or you might think that it's a long shot. encourage any veteran that you're working with, or if that's you, apply for enrollment, because it may be a different story now than it was even a few years ago. And again, there are other factors like multiple periods of discharge that always could have made you eligible for VA healthcare.
Great, thank you very much. Next question is a little bit more, again, around how to become a VJO. The person who wrote in says that they're a DVOP and would like to get involved helping with veterans. And is there a way to help that might include not going back to school, or what would that path look like?
Well, I would say, so for a DVOP, those are partnerships that we could really use now. And so I think a great way to help from your current position, I would really encourage you to contact the VJO specialist who serves your area from our website, and hopefully build a bridge there, because employment is such a foundational element of stability for justice-involved veterans, and we can't have enough partners in the communities that we're serving on that issue, and as well as other needs that justice-involved veterans have. But to answer the question, every VA medical center does its own hiring. They use the USA Jobs website that's shared across the federal government to do that. So for anyone who's interested, please keep an eye out there. Search by Veterans Justice Outreach or VJO specialist. Also postings for HCRV, Healthcare for Reentry Veterans positions, would be posted there as well. But those are all going to come out through USA Jobs.
Great, thank you. We have a question next asking about, for veterans whose disability benefits may have been disrupted due to incarceration, what's the best way to restart them? And if a disabled veteran is incarcerated, can the service member's family apply to help have the benefits redirected in order to be supportive?
Sure. So if a veteran is receiving VA disability benefits, is convicted of a felony, and is incarcerated for more than 60 days, those benefits by law need to be reduced. And there's a complicated schedule for how that reduction gets made. But that's the basic idea. Felony conviction plus 60 days of incarceration means a reduction in benefits. Once the incarceration ends, the veteran's preparing for release. What needs to happen, there is a process in place that the VA regional office, the Veterans Benefits Administration, uses to identify veterans' release dates and to turn those benefits back on. We encourage veterans in that position to be proactive and to contact the regional office where their benefits are administered and let them know that the veteran's preparing for release. It cannot hurt to provide additional notice and just to make sure that the regional office is aware that the veteran is going to be released. The apportionment question is a great one, because during the period of that reduction, veterans can request apportionment, is the term for that, of the balance, the funds that otherwise would have gone to the veteran, him or herself. Those benefits can be apportioned to the veteran's family members, and that's also done through the regional office. So there certainly is a provision for that during the period of the veteran's incarceration.
Great, thank you so much. Last question is specifically for Ray, and others can choose to weigh in if you'd like, but Ray, would love to ask your thoughts on what you would tell a veteran who's currently struggling.
First and foremost, believe in themselves. Do not give up. Realize that they are more than worthy of living a beautiful life, the life that they see, that they would love to live their life. And there may be some setbacks and maybe some times when you might fall down, but just please have the courage and the strength to get back up. Keep on doing, keep on trying. Do not give up. I am a Marine, and wow, I mean, it was a very, very proud moment when my senior drill instructor said dismissed because we had completed boot camp. But that was only the beginning. But all these years, those years when I was struggling with substance abuse, homelessness, my mental health condition, the only one that I was really more aware of was the homelessness. I was under the delusion that the next drink or the next drug, and I might not hear these voices no more. Well, I haven't had a drink now in over 13 years, and I still hear these voices, but I've learned how to live with them much better. Okay. And now as my doctors say, my psychotherapist, tell the voices, put your seatbelt on and buckle up because you in for a heck of a ride. And because I'm driving this bus, baby. And so you just going right along with me. I would just, regardless, first, hopefully, whoever that vet is, realize that, number one, you're special. When I say that, I mean, you believed in something much bigger than yourself. And you went out and you reached for it. So that by itself, hopefully should give you a little bit of encouragement, as I call it, that iota, and build upon it. Take that little bitty rock and build you a foundation, and then put your beautiful house on top of it and live with it, baby.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all, to all three of our panelists today. Cicely, would you like to close us out here on our final few slides?
Just a reminder that this is the contact information for the SMVF TA Center. If you had any questions that didn't get answered today or have questions about future activities, please let us know. We're happy to do that. As you mentioned, some of our partners on the line also have some amazing technical assistance resources coming out as well, and we can link you to those too. And how many days? Maybe like 2 or 3, Alexandra, they'll get to see this amazing recording of today on the National Council website. So I'm going to hand it back to you for a reminder on that evaluation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of our panelists today. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. Once you leave the session today, you'll be redirected to a survey on the presentation. And we would very much appreciate if you would take a few moments to provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email by the end of the week with a link to review a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of the National Council, the Policy Resources Associates, and SAMHSA's SVMF TA Center, I'd like to thank you all for joining today, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.